Testing. Oh, hi. OK, cool. We got 5 seconds. Never mind. All right. So, hey, everyone. I'm Kenny. I'm one of the co-founders of Manta Network, and I'm here to tell you about the other side of the story, which is why modular. And so for those of you that don't really know Manta, we are an Ethereum-based layer 2 solution, and we are the first one to actually start attempting this sort of modular approach. And one of the first major movements that we've made as a network was to actually migrate over to Celestia for modular data availability. And so just wanted to talk a little bit about that experience, the trade-offs, what to think about it, and the overarching higher level purpose of this quote-unquote movement of modularity and what this all means. Click. Oh, it's OK. I'll just use my fingers. All right. So, oh. I think, OK, yeah, there. Sorry. So yeah, I'm Kenny. That's my dog. And I've been in the crypto space for a while now. Actually, before we started Manta Network with my co-founder, I was finishing up my MBA over at MIT, and I was the teaching assistant there for Gary Gensler, who, for those of you that don't know, is now the chairman of the SEC. Anyway, so that's where I met my co-founder as well. And after we both finished and graduated, we decided to go work on Manta Network. And so we are the first L2 that actually leverages data availability. What does that mean? What does that actually mean for us? Actually, over the past 30 days, using this modular DA approach, our L2 has been able to save our users $1.8 million in gas fees in a period of 1 month. And so that's like $20 million over the course of a year, right? And so as we continue to see this type of on-chain activity pick up, I think the savings, the cost savings from the user side is going to continue to grow. So it could be even more than 20 million over the course of a year, which I think is pretty cool, right? I mean, that's a lot of money saved for users. I can get into how that all works, but why we decided to take this sort of modular approach is goes back to sort of even around 2011. That's when Litecoin started. How many of you guys remember Litecoin? Nice. We're all OGs in here. OK, so Litecoin I think of as more of a movement to become this quote-unquote Bitcoin killer, right? Because what ends up happening is you have Bitcoin, which came out, but then subsequently people start saying, OK, this thing's great for a store of value, but it's a little bit slow, and I'd like to make a faster version of this. So you've got the Litecoins of the world that come out. You've got the Digibytes of the world that come out. You've got later on Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin Silver and all these other forks of Bitcoin that are supposed to be better than Bitcoin because you reduce the block generation speed or you increase the block size, et cetera, et cetera. And so as a result, you see all these forks of this core technology coming out, and they're all building as a core team to try to outcompete Bitcoin. And so while they're in this little small community, this little pond of trying to outcompete Bitcoin, you see this huge innovation come along, right? You see Ethereum, and Turing completeness comes out. And so now, all of a sudden, the needs of the users have shifted. And so once Ethereum came out, now we're starting to think as a community about decentralized applications. But at the same time, all of these forks, all of these attempts, all of this talent that's been pouring into contributing to forks of Bitcoin has now, in 2024, fallen a little bit by the wayside, right? I mean, Bitcoin's still sort of the core community, and everything else is kind of, still chugging along. In 2017, we see the same thing happening. We see the same thing play itself out with Ethereum, right? I mean, I don't know how long everyone's been in here, but for those of you who have heard of the term Ethereum killers, who's heard of the Ethereum killers? All right, what's killed Ethereum, right? Like nothing, right? So you see all these forks come out for Ethereum as well. The most notable one with like the year-long ICO and everything, EOS. And then you've got like forks that have different programming languages that are supposed to be better for developers, such as Neo, for example, right? Like they come out, they say, OK, we're going to kind of do the same thing, but put a little twist on it. We're going to have our own sort of feature set. We're going to have our own differentiating technology. And it's going to be that killer of Ethereum. And you fast forward to 2024, but nothing has killed Ethereum yet. And shout out to ETHDenver, stronger than ever, right? We've upgraded to a bigger sport castle. And so, all this talent, again, pouring into all of this innovation that at the time was such a differentiating feature of everything. But now that we fast forward to a generation where now we're looking at scalability, all these other forks have become obsolete. And these forks have not been able to pivot, have not been able to innovate to continue to provide value for users in an ever-changing space. Now fast forward to 2024. And I think we're going through the same problem, right? Like, you've got this proliferation of L2s. And I guess we don't know who the winner is going to be here yet. But the point here is that we see the same pattern where these L2s, including Manta, are coming out and saying, you know what? We're going to do exactly what that person did, but we're going to add a little spin on it. And that spin is going to be our core technology that really differentiates us. But I mean, we've heard the same story in 2013. We've heard the same story in 2017. And so what makes 2024 different with L2s, right? And so the question here is OK, what happens in the next 5 years when your technology that you once thought was such a differentiator now doesn't matter at all, right? So my point here is the Web3 space continues to develop, continues to change, continues to evolve. But at the same time, we don't know where that's heading, right? If these Bitcoin forks knew that we would have Turing completeness in the next 5, 6 years, right, they could have prepared for that, but they didn't. And when Ethereum launched and we knew we were going to have scalability issues, then we would have talked about Ethereum as a Turing-complete settlement layer rather than thinking about building Uber on Ethereum. But we now know that these types of bottlenecks are unsustainable, and we have to continue to innovate and pivot to continue to build and drive towards this, quote unquote, 1 billion users. And I don't think L2s are the be-all, end-all for scalability as well, right? We already see sort of issues in that. And so when we started launching our L2, one of the things that we thought about was, OK, how do you really future-proof this? And so that's kind of why we decided to take more of this modular approach. But I think at the core of it, what does it mean to be modular? I think that modularity is a term that's been kind of marketed a lot recently, but at the core of this, right, what does it actually mean? Modular really just means taking components from specialized services and using it to plug in to whatever you're trying to build, right? And this could be for the sake of enhanced security, and enhanced agility, enhanced go-to-market, speed to market, and enhanced feature sets, et cetera, and enhanced specialization for your own core team as well. But at the end of the day, I think what this truly means and why this matters is because you're essentially able to now future-proof your own systems. And so you don't have to necessarily fall in the same trap that the Bitcoin forks, the Ethereum killers have experienced in the past, because now we do have specialized technologies that can help you such that you focus on your core competency and everything else can be handled in the background. It's almost like, who still here? How many of you guys are developers? OK. All right, three developers in the room. All right, cool. So you 3 developers, how many of you guys run your own servers? 1. All right, that's 33%. And I guarantee you, law of large numbers would have given you a much different result. So no one runs their own servers anymore, right? Because we use AWS, we use Google Compute, we use Microsoft Azure. And I'm not saying those are perfect solutions for infinitely scalable systems, because at some point economically, right, it does make sense to run your own infrastructure in-house. So congratulations to that billionaire right there. But for everyone else, right, cloud computing works for the 99%. And I do think that that is an example of this type of modular approach because you don't have to deal with your own infrastructure. You already have a specialized service that focuses on this type of activity for you. And so what I'm trying to get at is the emergence of specialized technologies with Celestia here being the core focus of this new generation of specialized technologies, because every time you think about modular, right, people think about Celestia. And so I do want to talk about how being able to leverage Celestia's modular DA systems have been able to help ourselves, help our users, and help us think about how we continue to future-proof. Because when we first thought about full settlement over to Ethereum versus taking some components, the call data specifically, and putting it into Celestia, right? Like, no one has done that before. I don't know if you guys know, but Celestia Mainnet just launched. And so it's definitely experimental. It's definitely tricky. It's definitely risky. And so we didn't know what to expect here, right? We ran a lot of tests on our test environments. But at the end of the day, right, mainnet launch, every demo goes well until you have to actually present it. But at the end of the day, what ended up happening was there was a very smooth transition here. And that smooth transition meant that we were now able to service users on our network at a fraction of the cost, and they experienced no downtime at all, right? There was no halt in block production. There was no network having to hard fork or anything. Everything was going just according to plan. And the only difference, the only thing that users started noticing was, oh, the gas fees are much lower than before, which is really cool, right? So I think that, could the Bitcoin forks of 2011 have done this? No, because there was no specialized technology. There's no specialized teams to build these types of feature sets that can be integrated on the infrastructure level to actually produce some type of quote-unquote modular system. Arguably, even the Ethereum forks couldn't do that. But in 2024, I think we're starting to see this emergence. And so I think that this is an opportunity that is going to continue to grow and continue to increase in adoption. And I do think the modular approach has a lot of advantages here in terms of being able to be flexible and that speed to market. Increasing scalability and throughput, right? I'm just going to kind of list off a bunch of cool things that happened as a result of this sort of modular DA shift. One of which is that increasing scalability and throughput. How many of you guys saw this whole wave of inscriptions just pile drive through Ethereum? Right? I saw one hand, two hands. OK. All right. Is everyone else in Web3? No worries, no worries. Yeah, so there was this inscription craze that started off in Bitcoin, and then one day someone said, you know what? What happens if we move this over to Ethereum? We found out what happens. It just drove its way into Ethereum and crashed a bunch of networks, right? And so either block production slowed or block production entirely halted because the throughput and the scalability of L2s are already kind of limited, which means that we're not done with the scalability problem here, guys, right? L2 doesn't mean we can all pack up and go home. But also, right, one of the cool things, or not one of the cool things, I don't know, whatever you decide, the inscriptions made its way to Manta as well. But by that time, we're actually leveraging Celestia already for that data availability side. And so that throughput was able to sustain us throughout that entire sort of chapter of major on-chain activity without having to significantly increase costs. I think at the peak of the inscriptions on Manta, we were seeing around 10 cents in gas fees. And then at the same time, there was no halt in block production because the throughput was significantly increased, right? And so we were able to, we're not masterminds. We didn't know that the inscription problem was coming. But at the same time, by being able to take something that's been specialized, built, and then plug it directly into our ecosystem, into our infrastructure on day one, rather than having to build it ourselves, we were fully prepared for it. And reducing user costs, right? I mean, again, going back to the gas fees, right? I think that most of you guys in here, who's heard of Ethereum? All right, 4 of you guys. Okay, so yeah, so the Dankun upgrade with proto-Dank sharding, right? Because the Ethereum Foundation and the Ethereum community is thinking a lot about scalability on the L2 side as well now, right? And so that a lot of the proto-Dank sharding concept with the increase in the blob space and everything, it's kind of been addressed with Celestia on the modular DA side. And so I'm glad to see Ethereum also kind of starting to think about that approach. And then hopefully in the future, we have full dank sharding, which allows scalability based on the number of nodes. But anyway, what does that all mean? It means that you can save a lot of gas fees. And so by actually leveraging Celestia from day one, right, we over the past month or so, we've been able to save that $1.8 million. So I do think that the value of this is also extremely tangible on the user side. And finally, increasing resiliency, okay? So who's heard of Solana? All right, so resiliency and Solana, right? You don't hear them in the same sentence often. But in this case, in this rare instance, right, like imagine Solana with resiliency, right? And so being able to reduce the gas fees, which hopefully increases the number of transactions and brings a more financial inclusion, while at the same time increasing resiliency. Of course, you can build in the resiliency monolithically as well. But these modular systems, right? Like, for example, Celestia. OK, what happens if Celestia goes down and I have nowhere to put my call data, right? Like, what happens to Manta then? That would really suck. But fortunately, there's fallback systems such that if Celestia goes down for whatever reason, right, we can fall back to Ethereum to place call data. And so that means the network stays up in the event of any type of these types of emergencies. At the same time, right, Celestia is the first to market, but definitely not the last. We see a lot of other sort of DA systems coming out, most notably EigenLayer, right, Avail. And so in the future, what this means is that Manta Network could possibly take advantage of all those other DA layers as well, plug them into our core infrastructure, such that if Celestia falls, then we've got other options to choose from that will still significantly save on gas costs, while also being able to deliver that same user experience with no impediment to block production. And so that's resiliency. And I think that's really amazing for modular systems, because now you have this optionality to build in additional components for the sake of resiliency, for the sake of redundancy. Yeah, and I think that's about it. And I've got about 2 minutes left. The point here that I'm trying to make is, definitely modularity comes with these trade-offs, right? One of the major trade-offs here is flexibility. If you build something from the ground up, I was watching this TikTok video the other day of this lady like creating her own sandwich from scratch. She like kneaded the dough, she put in all the ingredients, and she made the cheese herself. That's pretty impressive. But like, imagine like, I don't know if that's for you guys, but like I can't do that every single day, right? And so I do think that the monolithic approach allows you to make the cheese exactly how you want, make the bread exactly how you want. But at the same time, right, like when you think about the modular approach, it's more so you've got the bread from the grocery store, you've got the cheese from the grocery store, and so you can start putting these pieces in place today. And so I think John from the previous presentation was talking about that speed to market. I think the speed to market is definitely a benefit here. At the same time, these types of components are still in the early stage, are still very experimental. I'm not telling all of you guys to start taking the jump and start thinking modular and start building in modular components right now. This is not developer advice. But at the same time, I think that 2-3 years from now, when this type of practice continues to mature, then we're going to see the same type of deployment, development as we already do in spaces outside of Web3. Right? Just like in cloud computing, you don't build your own servers. You don't build your own operating system. You don't build your own database. You take MySQL. You take some type of Linux distro, right? And you run it in a data center that's hosted by AWS somewhere geographically. That's great. And that's exactly what works for 99% of applications. And I think that as we start heading towards this modular approach, I'm hoping that the blockchain space, at least on the infrastructure side, starts behaving in that scalable manner, just like in the cloud computing side that we've seen so much success in. So with that being said, I'm Kenny. I'm from Manta. And mic drop.